The Sunday dinner ritual at my brother Mark's house had become a monthly exercise in endurance. I sat at the polished oak table, cutting my grilled chicken into precise pieces, while Patricia, my sister-in-law of 8 years, dominated the conversation as usual. Her voice carried that particular pitch it reached when she was about to unveil her latest get-rich-quick scheme. I'm Victoria Chin, and I learned long ago that sometimes the best strategy is to let people underestimate you. At 34, I'd spent the last 12 years building what everyone in my family called my little art hobby. They saw me disappearing into my studio on weekends, paint under my fingernails, wearing clothes splattered with acrylics, and assumed I was just the eccentric sister-in-law who never quite grew up. What they didn't see were the property management meetings, the tenant negotiations, the careful financial planning that had turned a single storefront purchase into something much larger. But Patricia was about to force my hand in a way I hadn't anticipated. "You know what your problem is, Victoria." Patricia leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine glass with the confidence of someone who'd watched too many business podcasts. "You think small. That little art studio of yours? It's cute, but it's not building wealth." Mark, my older brother by 3 years, nodded along dutifully. He'd always been the type to agree with whoever spoke loudest, a trait that served him well in his middle management position, but made family dinners predictable. "Patricia's been doing really well with her business," he offered, cutting his steak with unnecessary precision. "Maybe she could help you think bigger." I continued eating, letting the familiar undercurrent of condescension wash over me. Patricia had been through 7 different MLM companies in the past 5 years. Essential oils, weight loss shakes, skincare products, jewelry, supplements, kitchen gadgets, and most recently, some kind of energy drink powder. Each time, she proclaimed it would be the one that would make them millionaires. "Essential oils are the future, Victoria," Patricia continued, pulling out her phone to show me a graph with ascending dollar signs. "My upline Jennifer made 6 figures last month alone. 6 figures. While you're playing with paintbrushes." The dismissive way she said paintbrushes made me pause mid-chew. I'd heard that tone before, usually directed at pursuits people consider frivolous or feminine. Art, in Patricia's world, was decoration. Something pretty but ultimately worthless compared to real business. "Tell her about the investment opportunity," Mark prompted, refilling his wine glass. Patricia's eyes lit up with the fervor of someone about to deliver what she considered life-changing advice. "Here's the thing. I'm expanding my territory, but I need capital. Real capital. And you're sitting on this asset that's just there, taking up space." I set down my fork and gave her my full attention. "What asset?" "The studio." She waved her hand as if it were obvious. "That building you rent for your art stuff. It's in a decent neighborhood, right? You could sell it, invest the money with me, and we could both be making passive income within 6 months." Mark nodded enthusiastically. Patricia's already identified 3 potential downlines in the area. The growth potential is incredible. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not anger, exactly. More like the quiet recognition that a line was about to be crossed. "I don't own the building, Patricia. I rent studio space." "Even better." She clapped her hands together. "No property taxes, no maintenance costs. You could get out of that lease, use whatever equipment money you have tied up, and invest it properly. Real business, Victoria, not hobby business." The word hobby hung in the air like a challenge. I'd heard it countless times over the years, usually accompanied by patient smiles and suggestions that I think practically about my future. What struck me wasn't the suggestion itself. but the casual assumption that my life's work was something to be discarded the moment a better opportunity presented itself. "How much do you think I could get out of the studio?" I asked quietly. Patricia's face brightened. She'd clearly mistaken my question for interest, rather than curiosity about just how little she thought my work was worth. "Well, art supplies aren't worth much used. Maybe a few thousand for the good brushes and canvases. The real value is freeing up your time and mental energy for something that actually scales." She leaned forward conspirationally. "Victoria, I'm talking about residual income. Money that works for you while you sleep." Mark jumped in with supporting statistics about MLM success rates that I suspected came directly from Patricia's company materials. I let him talk while I calculated just how far off their assumptions were. They thought I rented a single studio space. They thought my equipment consisted of easels and paint tubes. They thought my monthly expenses were negligible, and my potential investment capital was limited to whatever I could get for selling art supplies on Craigslist. What they didn't know was that 3 years ago, I'd purchased the entire building that housed my studio. Not just my unit, but all 12 units in the converted warehouse complex. What started as a way to secure my own workspace had evolved into a carefully managed property with a waiting list of artists, small businesses, and creative professionals desperate for affordable commercial space in the gentrifying neighborhood. The building generated $18,000 monthly in rental income. After expenses, taxes, and maintenance reserves, I cleared about $180,000 annually from the property alone. Add in the sales from my own artwork, which had found a steady market among corporate clients and private collectors, and my hobby was more profitable than Mark's 15-year career in logistics management. But I'd never talked about the financial side with family, partly because money conversations made me uncomfortable, but mostly because I'd learned that success had a way of changing relationships. The moment people knew you had more than they expected, every interaction became weighted with unspoken calculations. "You know what?" I said, setting down my napkin. "Maybe you're right." Patricia practically glowed. "Really? You're interested?" "I'm definitely thinking about it," I replied, which was true in a way. I was thinking about how fascinating it was that someone could be so confident about a situation they understood so poorly. Mark reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "This is great, Vic. Patricia's going to help you build real wealth." The conversation moved on to other topics. Mark's upcoming promotion review, Patricia's latest essential oil testimonial, their teenage daughter Sophia's college plans. I participated just enough to avoid seeming rude while my mind wandered to the text I'd received that morning from my property manager, confirming that 2 more units would be available next month when the current tenants relocated to larger spaces. After dinner, I helped clear the table while Patricia showed me her income projections on various phone apps. The numbers were impressive in the abstract, but I noticed they all assumed perfect market conditions, exponential growth, and recruitment rates that defied basic mathematics. When I asked about her actual earnings versus projections, she deflected with stories about other people's success. "The key is thinking bigger," she said, loading plates into the dishwasher. "You've been thinking like an employee instead of an entrepreneur." I almost laughed. The comment revealed so much about her assumptions. In Patricia's worldview, employment and entrepreneurship were binary categories, and anything involving creativity fell automatically into the employee bucket. She couldn't conceive of art as a business or understand that ownership took forms beyond selling products through social media. "How soon would you want to make this transition?" I asked. "Honestly, the sooner the better. I got my eye on a premium starter package that would set us both up perfectly, but the pricing is only good to the end of this month. She paused dramatically. It's a $15,000 investment, but Victoria, we're talking about changing your life. $15,000. That was roughly what I collected in rent from 3 units in a month. Patricia was proposing I dismantle my entire livelihood for the equivalent of a quarter's income from just a fraction of my property. Let me think about it, I said. Don't think too long, she warned, switching to her practiced sales voice. Opportunities like this don't wait for people who aren't ready to commit. The drive home gave me time to process the conversation. Patricia wasn't malicious, exactly. She genuinely believed she was offering me something valuable. But her certainty about what my life should look like, combined with her complete lack of curiosity about what my life actually was, felt like a particular kind of disrespect. I pulled into the parking lot behind my building and sat in the car for a moment, looking up at the converted warehouse that had become the foundation of everything I'd built. The red brick facade glowed warm under the streetlights, and I could see soft light spilling from several studio windows where tenants were working late. Unit 3 housed a ceramic studio where Elena Martinez created custom tiles for high-end restaurants. Unit 7 was rented by a husband and wife team who designed and built custom furniture. Unit 12 belonged to a photographer who specialized in corporate headshots and had a waiting list 3 months long. These weren't hobbyists playing with art supplies. They were skilled professionals running legitimate businesses, and I was their landlord. More than that, I was part of a creative community that Patricia couldn't see past her spreadsheets and recruitment targets. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Thinking about our conversation. Let me know when you want to see the starter package details. This is going to be amazing. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, definitely interested. Let's talk more soon. The next morning, I had coffee with James Rodriguez, my property manager and longtime friend. James handled the day-to-day operations of the building, lease agreements, maintenance requests, tenant relations, while I focused on long-term strategy and my own artistic work. Patricia wants me to sell the building, I told him, stirring sugar into my coffee. James nearly choked on his espresso. Sell the building. To invest in essential oils. She doesn't know I own it. She thinks I rent studio space and should liquidate my art supplies to buy into her MLM. Jesus, Victoria. How long has she been in your family? 8 years. Long enough to know better, but apparently not long enough to ask better questions. James leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. What are you going to do? That was the question I'd been wrestling with since last night. The easy path was to simply tell Patricia the truth, show her the property records, explain the actual scope of my business, and watch her recalibrate her assumptions. But something about the way she dismissed my work as a hobby made me want to approach this differently. I think I'm going to let her keep talking, I said finally. James raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. She's so convinced she knows what's best for me. I want to see how far she'll push before someone asks the right questions. And if she doesn't ask the right questions, I smiled. Then she'll learn the answers anyway. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia ramped up her campaign to convert me into her essential oils downline. She sent daily texts with success stories, income screenshots, and motivational quotes about taking control of your financial future. She forwarded webinars about breaking free from the employee mindset and invited me to virtual meetings with her upline mentors. I attended one of the meetings out of curiosity. 12 people on a video call, mostly women in their 30s and 40s, listening to a woman named Jennifer explained how essential oils had transformed her life. The presentation was professionally produced, full of testimonials and income claims, but light on actual business mechanics. When Jennifer asked if anyone had questions, I unmuted myself. I'm curious about the market saturation aspect. If everyone in the network is targeting the same customer base, how do you avoid competing with your own team members? There was a brief pause before Jennifer pivoted to a rehearsed answer about abundance mindset and expanding the pie instead of fighting for slices. Patricia messaged me privately during the call. Great question. You're already thinking like a business owner. But I noticed Jennifer didn't actually answer the question. And when I asked follow-up questions about profit margins, customer retention rates, and realistic income timelines for new recruits, the responses became increasingly vague. After the call, Patricia called me immediately. Wasn't that incredible? Jennifer is making $20,000 a month. How long did it take her to reach that level? I asked. She started 3 years ago, but Victoria, that's the beauty of this business. The growth is exponential. Jennifer's first year, she made $30,000. Second year, $85,000. This year, she's on track for $240,000. The numbers were designed to impress, but they also revealed something Patricia hadn't considered. If Jennifer was making $240,000 annually, and that represented 3 years of exponential growth, then the vast majority of people in her network were making significantly less. Basic mathematics. What did Jennifer do before essential oils? I asked. I think she was in marketing or something corporate. But that's exactly my point. She broke free from the rat race and created time freedom. I didn't mention that marketing skills were probably relevant to building a sales network, or that 3 years of 60-hour weeks building a business wasn't exactly time freedom. Instead, I said, "It sounds really promising, Patricia. I'm excited to learn more." The following Sunday, Patricia arrived at dinner armed with a tablet full of presentation materials and a bag of essential oil samples. She prepared what she called a personalized business proposal for my transition out of art and into entrepreneurship. "I've been thinking about your situation all week," she announced over appetizers. "And I realized we need to be strategic about this timeline." Mark beamed with pride. "Patricia's been working so hard on this. She really wants to help you succeed." Patricia pulled up a spreadsheet on her tablet. "Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. Your lease is probably month to month, right? Most art studios are flexible like that." I nodded, not bothering to correct her assumption. "Perfect. So you could give notice anytime. Now, for liquidating your equipment, I found this company that buys art supplies in bulk. They wouldn't pay retail, obviously, but you could probably get $3,000 to $5,000 for everything." She'd clearly spent time researching, which made her complete misunderstanding of my situation more fascinating than annoying. "The starter package I want you to consider is $15,000, she continued. "But here's the thing. If you can't cover it all up front, you could start with the $5,000 basic package and upgrade once you're generating income." Mark leaned forward, studying the spreadsheet. "This looks really well thought out, Patricia." "I've been doing this for 6 months now," she said proudly. "I know what works. Victoria, I'm projecting that you could replace whatever you're making from art sales within the first quarter and be making double that by month 6. "How much do you think I make from art sales?" I asked. Patricia glanced at Mark, then back at me. "Well, I mean, it's probably not a ton, right? Maybe $1,000 or $2,000 a month if you're really hustling. The point is, even if you're doing better than that with art, this business model scales in a way that art never can. 1 to 2,000 a month. Patricia had calculated my entire livelihood at the level of a part-time job. Her confidence in advising me to abandon my career was based on the assumption that my career barely existed. "You're right about scaling," I said carefully. "Art is very time-intensive." "Exactly." Patricia's eyes lit up. "You're trading time for money, which means your income is always capped by how many hours you can work. With essential oils, you build systems that generate passive income. Your money works for you instead of the other way around." She pulled up testimonials from other former artists who transitioned to real business. I recognized the language patterns from every MLM presentation I'd ever seen. Before and after stories that focused on lifestyle changes rather than actual financial details. "Victoria, I need you to really think about this," Patricia said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "I'm offering you something that could change your life, but I can't want success for you more than you want it for yourself." The comment stung, not because it was true, but because it revealed how Patricia saw me. In her mind, I was someone who lacked ambition, who needed to be rescued from my own limited thinking. She couldn't imagine that I might have chosen my path deliberately, or that my definition of success might be different from hers. "I do want success," I said quietly. "I think we might just define it differently." "How so?" Mark asked, genuinely curious. I considered my answer carefully. This felt like a moment where I could either educate them about the reality of my situation or continue letting them operate from their assumptions. Patricia had invested so much energy in convincing me to abandon my hobby that part of me wanted to see how she'd react to learning what she was actually asking me to give up. "Patricia, can I ask you something?" I said instead of answering Mark's question. "Of course. You've been so generous with your time, helping me think through this transition. I'm curious. Have you visited my studio?" She looked confused. "Your studio?" "No. I know where it is generally, but I haven't been inside. Would you like to see it before I make any final decisions? I think it might help you understand the scope of what we're talking about." Patricia glanced at Mark, who shrugged. "Sure, that makes sense. It would help me give you better advice about liquidating everything." "Perfect. How about this Saturday morning? Say, 10 a.m. "That works," Patricia said, already looking ahead to what she clearly saw as the final step in converting me to her business model. I spent the rest of dinner listening to her explain the different essential oil product lines and compensation structures, nodding along while mentally calculating how much my building would appreciate in value over the next 5 years. Property values in the neighborhood had increased 12% annually for the past 3 years, and the city's investment in public transportation was only accelerating gentrification. But more than the money, I thought about the community we'd built in the converted warehouse, the collaborative projects between tenants, the informal mentorship that happened when experienced artists worked alongside newer ones, the way the building hummed with creative energy on weekend afternoons when everyone was pursuing their own version of success. Patricia saw a woman wasting her potential on a hobby. What she was about to discover was a carefully built ecosystem that supported 12 small businesses and generated more annual income than her essential oils projections promised. Saturday morning arrived crisp and bright. I got to the building early, not because I needed to prepare anything, but because I wanted a few quiet moments to appreciate what I'd built before Patricia's worldview collided with reality. Alina was already in her ceramic studio, wedging clay for a large installation piece. Through the window, I could see her moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd mastered their craft over decades. In Unit 7, The furniture makers had their garage door open, letting the sound of sanders and routers spill into the courtyard. My own studio occupied Unit 1, the corner space with the best natural light. The walls were lined with completed paintings, works in progress, and reference materials for commissioned pieces. But the studio was just the visible part of what I did here. The real business happened in Unit 2, which I'd converted into an office for managing the property and my freelance graphic design work. Patricia arrived precisely at 10 a.m., wearing athletic clothes and carrying a large tote bag that probably contained essential oil samples for my transition consultation. Mark came with her, looking around the neighborhood with the vague curiosity of someone visiting a part of town they'd heard about but never explored. "This is a nice area," Mark said as I led them toward the building entrance. "Lot of development happening." "The gentrification has been pretty dramatic," I agreed. "Property values have gone crazy." Patricia was already in assessment mode, mentally cataloging what she saw. "How much do you pay for rent here?" "It varies," I said, which was true in a way. My mortgage payment varied slightly based on property tax adjustments and escrow calculations. I led them through the main entrance, past the directory board that listed all 12 tenant businesses, and down the hallway toward my studio. Patricia was taking notes on her phone, probably calculating square footage and rental rates. "Wow, this is bigger than I expected," she said as I unlocked the studio door. The space was larger than most people expected. High ceilings, exposed brick walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the room with natural light. My easels were set up near the windows, surrounded by organized chaos of paints, brushes, canvases, and reference materials. But it was the finished work that made Patricia stop talking. The walls displayed 12 months of painting, ranging from small, intimate pieces to large-scale corporate commissions. Each piece was labeled with a small placard showing the title, year, and, in some cases, sold stickers with price information. Mark walked slowly around the room, studying the paintings with new attention. "Vic, I had no idea you were working at this level." Patricia was staring at a large abstract piece labeled "Commissioned for Morrison & Associates Law Firm, $8,500. Her expression had shifted from confident assessment to confused recalculation. "You sold that for $8,500, she asked. "That was last month's commission," I said casually. "Corporate clients pay well for original work." I watched Patricia's mental math adjust in real time. She was beginning to understand that my hobby generated more than the $1,000, $2,000 monthly she'd calculated. "How many pieces do you sell per month?" Mark asked. "It varies. Some months, just 1 or 2 smaller pieces. Other months, I'll complete a major commission like that one. Plus, I do freelance graphic design work for several regular clients." Patricia was studying the price tags more carefully now. "So you're making, what, $10,000 a month from this?" "Some months more, some less. But that's just from my own work." Patricia looked confused. "What do you mean, just from your own work?" This was the moment I'd been building toward. "Well, there's also the rental income from the other 11 units." The silence that followed was profound. Patricia blinked several times, as if processing a sentence in a foreign language. "Rental income?" Mark said slowly. I walked over to the window and gestured toward the courtyard. "I own the building, all 12 units. Everyone else pays rent." Patricia sat down heavily on a paint-splattered stool. "You own the building?" "I bought it 3 years ago. The previous owner was ready to retire, and I was tired of dealing with unpredictable rent increases." Mark was staring at me like I'd revealed I was secretly a superhero. You own this entire building? Why didn't you ever mention it? It's not something that usually comes up at family dinners. Patricia's voice was very quiet. How much rental income? About $18,000 a month gross. After expenses, taxes, and reserves, I clear around $15,000 monthly from the property management side. I watched Patricia's face as she calculated that my monthly passive income was equivalent to her initial investment proposal for my entire career transition. So you make $15,000 a month just from rent, Mark said, still processing. Plus whatever you make from selling art and design work. Plus appreciation. The building's value has increased about $400,000 since I bought it. Patricia stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the courtyard where several tenants were moving equipment. Her tote bag of essential oil samples sat forgotten on the floor. I don't understand, she said finally. Why didn't you tell me any of this? You never asked, I said simply. You assumed you knew what my situation was and started making recommendations based on those assumptions. But you said maybe I was right about selling. I said maybe you were right that I should think bigger, which I am. I'm considering buying the building next door. The conversation that followed was awkward in the way that conversations become when someone realizes they've completely misread a situation. Patricia oscillated between apologetic embarrassment and defensive justification. She'd been trying to help, she insisted. How could she have known I was actually successful when I never talked about money? Mark was more direct in his confusion. Why had I let Patricia spend weeks developing a business plan for my career change if I wasn't actually interested in changing careers? I was curious. I said honestly. I wanted to see what assumptions people were making about my life. And, Patricia asked, her sales training habits making her push for clarity, even in her discomfort. I learned that when people can't see the value in what you do, they assume there is no value. And once they've made that assumption, they'll build elaborate justifications for why you should abandon it. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. I really thought I was helping you build wealth. You were trying to help? I agreed. But you were solving a problem I don't have. The tour of the rest of the building completed Patricia's education. She met Alina, whose ceramic installations sold for $15,000 to $25,000 each. She saw the furniture maker's showroom where custom pieces started at $3,000. She talked to the photographer in Unit 12, whose corporate headshot sessions booked 3 months in advance at $500 per shoot. By the time we finished walking through all 12 units, Patricia understood that she'd been trying to convince me to abandon a thriving creative community and a 6-figure income to sell essential oils to my friends on social media. I feel really stupid, she said as we stood outside the building. Don't, I said, and meant it. You couldn't have known what you hadn't been told. But I made so many assumptions. Everyone makes assumptions. The question is what you do when you realize your assumptions were wrong. Mark had been mostly quiet during the tour, but now he spoke up. Vic, I owe you an apology. I've been thinking of your art as a hobby for years. I know. Why didn't you correct me? I considered the question, because I didn't need your validation to know what I'd built was valuable, and because sometimes it's easier to let people underestimate you than to constantly justify your choices. Patricia was staring at her phone, scrolling through weeks of text messages about income opportunities and financial freedom. God, I must have sounded so patronizing. A little, I admitted, but your heart was in the right place. Was it though? I mean, I was so focused on convincing you to do what I thought was best that I never bothered to understand what you actually wanted. That observation showed more self-awareness than I'd expected from Patricia. Maybe there was hope for our relationship after all. The drive back to Mark's house was quiet. Patricia seemed to be processing the gap between her assumptions and reality, while Mark kept glancing at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. "Can I ask you something?" Patricia said as we sat in their driveway. "Sure. Are you happy? Like really happy with what you've built?" I thought about the question seriously. Most days, yes. I get to create art I'm proud of, work with interesting people, and build something sustainable. I don't have all the answers, and some months are harder than others, but yeah, I'm happy. Patricia nodded slowly. I think I've been so focused on financial metrics that I forgot to consider whether people actually like their lives. "Do you like yours?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. I like the idea of my life. The vision of being my own boss, building something, having financial freedom. But honestly, most days I'm stressed about recruitment targets and inventory management, and I spend a lot of time trying to convince people they need things they probably don't need. So what would make you happier? I don't know yet. Maybe something that feels more useful, like what you've built. You're not just making money, you're creating a space for other people to succeed too. That evening, I sat in my studio as the sun set through the tall windows, painting and thinking about assumptions and underestimation. Patricia's essential oils proposal had been built on a foundation of misconceptions, but her core motivation, wanting to help someone she cared about build a better life, was genuine. The irony was that I'd spent years building exactly the kind of life she claimed to want for me: financial independence, creative fulfillment, and control over my time and energy. But because she couldn't see past her own definition of business success, she tried to convince me to abandon it all for a business model that promised those same things with significantly more risk and effort. 6 months later, Patricia quit the essential oils company. She'd realized that her success depended on recruiting friends and family into a system that worked well for very few people, and the ethical implications bothered her more than she had initially understood. Instead, she went back to school for nonprofit management and started working with a local arts advocacy organization. It turned out she had real talent for fundraising and community building when she applied those skills to something she believed in, rather than something she was trying to believe in. Mark and I started having monthly coffee meetings where we actually talked about our work instead of just making polite conversation. He was genuinely interested in the business side of property management and creative entrepreneurship, and I was curious about his logistics experience. We even collaborated on a feasibility study for converting an old warehouse district into affordable artist housing. The building next door became available 8 months after that Saturday morning tour. I bought it, not as an expansion of my rental business, but as a collaborative space for larger art installations and community events. The 12 original tenants helped design the renovation, creating a space that serves the broader creative community while remaining financially sustainable. Patricia sometimes volunteers at events in the new space, and she's become one of the building's most effective advocates with city planning committees and arts funding organizations. She jokes that she finally found her MLM, but this time it stands for Making Lives Meaningful instead of multi-level marketing. Looking back, I think the most valuable part of the whole experience wasn't proving Patricia wrong about my career, but discovering how much energy I'd been spending hiding my success from people who I thought couldn't handle it. The assumption that family members would feel threatened or diminished by my achievements had become its own kind of limitation. Now when people ask what I do, I tell them I'm an artist and property developer who creates spaces for creative businesses to thrive. It's a more complete truth than I paint sometimes, and it opens conversations instead of closing them. Patricia was right about one thing. Thinking bigger does matter. She just didn't realize I'd already been doing it for years, in ways she couldn't see, until she learned to look beyond her own assumptions about what success looks like. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to make yourself smaller to accommodate other people's limited imagination of what your life could be.